Morning, everyone. We are looking back at a headline from last week, a story that has been out there for the last couple of weeks, but we're looking at the coverage from the Wall Street Journal last Monday. And it relates to this idea of, is that kosher? Rabbis debate plant-based pork. And the story goes as follows. It might look like pork, smell like pork, even taste like pork, just don't call it pork. The arrival of fake plant-based meat expanded the culinary horizon for many observant Jews in recent years. Faux cheeseburgers were suddenly on the menu at kosher restaurants without breaking the ban on mixing dairy with meat. Chili cheese fries became an option. Can Impossible Food Incorporated's fake pork also get a kosher seal of approval? Just the word pork was too much to stomach, said Rabbi Menachem Genack, chief executive of the world's largest kosher certification group, OU Kosher. Its board voted early this year against the company's kosher certification request for Impossible Pork. The prominence of OU Kosher division of the Orthodox Union, one of the leading organizations of religious American Jewry, makes its rejection one that other kosher certifiers may find hard to ignore. The OU said it might itself revisit the decision in the future. Right, so this is something that is, it's not just about fake meat products in particular. This is really about the difficulty with the pork. At various points in history, persecutors ranging from the ancient Greeks and medieval Christians all the way up to the Nazis used pork as a test of sorts for Jews, where they break their law or face death. That's a difficult association to break, Rabbi Genack said. People react very strongly to the word pork. Chani Applebaum, a New York kosher food blogger and cookbook author, says she had no problem eating Impossible cheeseburgers, but I have a hard time getting past the idea of eating something that's called pork, and it's meant to taste like pork. And we saw that a couple of weeks ago, this idea of how ingrained the opposition to the idea of chazer is in the Jewish tradition. Usually, just because something is forbidden doesn't mean we have to completely avoid it, but there's the business of not going into business to raise pigs or to make money off of pigs or the like, an extended, if you will, level of prohibition, because very much for the historical nature of the pig coming into it. We're about to celebrate Hanukkah, and that was one of the elements of persecution brought down the book of Maccabees. So there's a certain visceral reaction to the idea of pork. Look, sometimes when we want to refer to something as being really not kosher, we call it chazer treif, even if it doesn't have pork in it. It's the very antithesis of kosher. But here, if it's a very antithesis of kosher, we have seemingly a certain antipathy, if not a halachic rationale, for putting the word kosher and the word pork in the same sentence or on the same label. And so here was modern Jewish historian's reaction. This is possibly the most important decision for Judaism in the 21st century, Mr. Coleman said, of the OU's decision regarding Impossible Pork. I think it's a little bit of a hyperbolic statement. I think there's probably other big decisions for Judaism in the 21st century. But competitor Beyond Meat Incorporated has said it has yet to seek kosher certification for its Beyond Pork, which it said was created for the Chinese market and is available only in China so far. We'll have to see how that's going to play out, said Chaim Fogelman, communications director at OK Kosher, another US-based kosher certification group which approved Beyond Meat's other products. OK Kosher hasn't been asked to certify Impossible Pork, it said. Beyond Pork, Impossible Pork, OU, OK, a lot of names in the acronyms out here. Rabbi Genack of OU Kosher says he suspects that doubters might one day come around and allow faux pork to be certified as kosher. It's not a halachically based decision. We can review it again, he said, using the Hebrew term to describe Jewish law. The decision was based on the emotional reaction some kosher eaters have had to kosher certified pork-related products in the past that also had no actual pork in them. Islam too prohibits pork consumption. Impossible Food said it also tried to get Impossible Pork certified as halal or permissible by the Islamic Food and Nutrition Council of America, but it was rejected there too. Right? They're also from that way. The fake meats haven't hit the same sensitivity buttons for Hindus, many of whom practice a religiously encouraged but not obligatory vegetarian lifestyle. Rabbi Ganak said rabbis are still grappling with how to apply the laws of kosher to lab-grown meat, with beef likely being accepted but pork rejected. This last sentence I added into the conversation because it is within the same menu conversation, but here we're talking about plant-based pork. And Rabbi Ganak is just making a comment about lab-grown meat, which starts with cells of the actual animal, and there it seems that at least the current trend in thinking about how to view lab-grown meat is as to look at it as being from where it's the cells come from. That's how you're going to look at the finished product. So if it comes from a kosher animal, it'll be kosher. Comes from a non-kosher animal, it'll be not kosher. But here we're looking at the plant-based pork, and we're seeing that there's a certain antipathy specifically to the word pork, because as we're going to look at, there are plenty of other products. The first source we're going to look at is from 6 years ago. Bacon goes kosher. How come there wasn't this opposition to bacon or fake bacon or fake it? It's actually only in more recent years that there's been a hypersensitivity towards this. Certain restaurants that had things like lamb bacon on the menu were told that they had to change it to fake bacon or to fakin, even though if it's lamb bacon, what else is it going to be other than from lamb? But this is the issue that is emerging. And we're going to dig a little bit more deeply into Rabbi Ganak's comment that it's not a halachic-based decision, but not everything is halacha. But what are the Jewish values involved? And we're going to see a couple of articles, a couple of rabbinic views. There was an article you see in the sources. There was an article in the Jewish press 3 years ago where a number of rabbis were asked that also open up to a couple of Jewish sources that will inform our discussion. But I'm happy to take any questions, reactions, or comments before we dive into the sources.
Well, again, also, it's just a question of following what the others are doing, or that sort of
Right.
thing.
Correct. Yeah, there's definitely sort of a societal momentum that gets picked up here. But I think in the question, it could be very true that 5-6 years ago, things seemed a little bit, fake bacon was okay, but kosher pork is not. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
Rabbi,
Yes, Judy.
what is a hamburger?
It's really, I wonder if there's like kind of what the trademark, what the history is, because really, I do remember, and it's funny that you mentioned this because it brings back a memory. I happened to have been at Yeshiva University on Sunday for the open house for Yeshiva College with my son. And we brought back memories of the YU cafeteria where it said beef burgers. They weren't hamburgers, they were beef burgers. But I think that somehow the term hamburger meat was used to describe ground beef in general. But
Right.
Look, I think that's a very valid point.
I think hamburger,
Yes, Carla.
like frankfurters for Frankfurt.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
That's why
agree.
maybe it's where it comes
I
from.
said, I think hamburger is the name of the city, Hamburg.
All right, so
Like
it's not,
frankfurter is
okay, we
Frankfurt.
get-
So it's not,
That's it, pretty good.
so it's
All right.
not ham, it's for the city.
Okay, so it's geographical. It's not about ham and just,
Exactly.
it's not about Franks.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but Judy, very good linguistic point, nonetheless.
Thanks.
Rabbi, it's Joe Packin. One other point of
Yeah.
information. I read last year, 2 years ago, that during Lent, the Catholic Church also suggested people that observe Lent and don't eat meat during that period refrain from impossible burgers because they don't want people to have the pleasure of even thinking about meat during Lent. Just point
Take
of
it up with
information.
Cardinal
Well,
Dolan.
I guess that we call that asu siyag la Torah, make a fence around the Torah, and they have it there too. So, Howard, you had something you wanted to ask before. No, you're good. Okay. So if we let's go back in time, 6 years, so with bacon going kosher. Again, OU, source number one, Rabbi Moshe Elephant, CEO of the Orthodox Union's Kosher Department, estimates his organization, the world's largest not-for-profit kosher certification agency, certifies hundreds of imitation bacon products. Everything from vegetarian strips to bacon-flavored Ritz crackers with its OU seal. I grew up in a world where if you kept kosher, you knew your diet was very limited. That world no longer exists, Elephant said. People who are keeping kosher now are saying, we don't want to be limited in what we can eat because we're keeping kosher. When fake bacon products become more common on the kosher market, there's some concern that consumers would be misled. There was a lot of discussion internally here whether we should certify them under any circumstances. Elephant said the concern was that people would make the mistake of thinking that pork bacon could somehow be kosher, which it cannot. Ultimately, the OU decided to certify imitation bacon products, but there's an extra step in the certification process for these foods. The label for the product has to prominently feature words like fake or imitation. So it is abundantly clear to consumers it is not real bacon. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has similar guidelines for the clear labeling of pork-free bacon-like products, but the OU guidelines are stricter. So, bacon is in, pork is out. Or I haven't heard any discussion of revisiting the conversation about this. So this was the conversation then. And Rabbi Elephant brings up a couple of ideas which in fact are worthy of discussion. Some Jewish sources, in terms of we don't want to be limited because in what we can eat because we're keeping kosher. So if you look at source number 3 on the second page, Yerushalmi Kedushin, Rav Chizkiah Cohen in the name of Rav. In the future, one will be judged for all that his eyes saw and he didn't eat. There's this idea found in the Talmud that we're supposed to enjoy the world around us. Whatever we can, we should partake. This is the statement of the Talmud that is invoked in a story they tell of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, rabbi of Frankfurt. I guess he ate Frankfurters. He lived through most of the 19th century, 1807 to 1887 or so. The end of his life, he told his family that he wanted to embark on a trip to the Alps. And they said, Father, you're too old. You're not going to be able to make the trip. He's like, why do you want to go? He said, well, the Talmud says that at the end of days, I'll be judged for all that I could have seen, but didn't partake of. And when I want to get to the world to come, the heavenly tribunal is going to ask Samson, how come you didn't see my Alps? Is what how he responded to his children. So there's an idea that we should not be held back. And on some level, just because it's not kosher is not a reason not to want it. The Sifra and Kedoshim, source number 2. Whence is it derived that a man should not say, I do not desire to wear shatnez, I do not desire to eat the flesh of a pig, I don't desire to have illicit relations, I do desire it, but what can I do? My Father in heaven has decreed against it, because the Torah says, I have set you apart from the peoples to be unto me. Right? It's not that the language in the Midrash. It's not that I don't want it. I want it, but I can't have it. And so, having the desire to taste these forbidden tastes isn't necessarily antithetical to Torah Judaism. We're supposed to take advantage of what we can take advantage of, and if it's something that we can't have, we can desire it. At the end of the day, we have to ultimately make the right decision and not partake of something that's forbidden. But bacon smells good. Maybe it's okay to have a desire for it. And if there's a way, you combine these two sources, a way to find some sort of permissible solution, then partaking from that very much is in line with the Jewish tradition. So,
Rabbi,
yes,
Aviva, is there a halachic basis for like lifnei iver, lo titei mishal, or the
So we're
concept
gonna
of muksa?
so lifnei iver lo titei mishal, in terms of, what do you mean by that? Explain a little bit more.
That it's if somebody makes a mistake and they don't understand that it's fake, that they'll eat the real.
Well,
or you're placing people in certain circumstances. I'm just asking if there's
right,
a
right.
halachic basis for lifnei iver, and is there a
So I
halachic basis for
think
muksa?
that the short answer is no, as long as you've covered your bases by writing imitation, by writing fake, by writing artificial. Similar with lifnei iver. It's a longer conversation, the parameters of lifnei iver, but as long as you don't facilitate directly the transgression, it really isn't lifnei iver. There are different opinions and different discussions about what kind of facilitation. One of the classic.
So the
cases-
OU is not using a halachic basis for their decision. They're using a
Correct.
pragmatic basis.
Correct. That is what Rabbi Genak said now, and that's what Rabbi Elephant said in a different direction then. This is halachically is perfectly permissible. And with bacon, they went ahead with it, and with pork, they're not going ahead with it. And it seems that on some level, the approach to it has changed, and we're going to try and analyze what has changed. Is it, what sources are they looking at maybe a little bit differently? And it's a good point. Maybe lifnei iver, maybe it's not directly lifnei iver, but maybe it sets a wrong example. And we're going to see a little bit about that, in some sources.
And didn't they deal with this with phony shrimp? And
Sure, they dealt with this with all the fake stuff.
right. So they're still basing it on the same things, or it's something new has happened. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, I think maybe it is. Let's see.
Okay.
I think that there's a
Okay.
couple of. I think that the permissive sources remain the same. We're allowed to desire it as long as we don't transgress. We're allowed to partake as long as it's permitted. What might be some of the things that would stand in the way, that might buttress or support the OU position as articulated by Rabbi Genak in the article today. That could also apply to the other examples of the things that you mentioned, right? So source number 4 is another famous halachic principle, not lifnei iver, but maris ayin. Right? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, kol makom she'asu chachamim mipnei maris ha'ayin, afilu b'chadrei chadarim asu. Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, wherever the sages prohibit an action due to the appearance of a prohibition, even in the innermost chambers where no one will see it, it is prohibited. So when we're talking about maris ayin, about what people might think when seeing you engage in an activity that they may think of as prohibited, if you're not allowed to do it, that people may see you, you're not allowed to do it even completely in private, right? Where no one's going to see it. And so, how does this, how does this manifest itself in practical halacha? So, an example of maris ayin in practical halacha in the kosher realm is in source number 5. That they're talking about. Obviously, we don't mix milk and meat together, but they say that we have. The practice is to put almond milk. Kind of interesting. Well, interesting that almond milk, basar oaf, and you're allowed to put fowl, chicken in it, because milk and chicken is only rabbinically forbidden. Right. The only time you're worried about, the only time there's official maris ayin is when it's a biblical transgression. But with the meat from a domesticated animal, place almonds next to the milk so that people don't misunderstand. This is the Rama pointing out that if you're going to have, I guess the term that was used, the catering term, if you're going to have non-dairy coffee creamer, you have to actually have you have to have
container.
the carton. You have to have the carton out there so that you know where it's coming from. I think it's very interesting that they talk about almond milk because, at least when I was growing up, no one had almond milk. Everyone used coffee rich or, some of the other white stuff that had nothing natural in it. But I guess, once upon a time, they had more natural products. But if you're serving chicken, you don't have to have the container because people may think, is it milk? I don't know, Rosie's almond milk or regular milk over there. But when it comes to if it's with chicken, it doesn't matter because even if someone's going to think you have chicken with real milk, that's only a rabbinic prohibition. There's no maris ayin. But if it's a biblical prohibition, beef and milk, then you have to be more careful and you have to keep the almonds next to the milk so they know that it's almond milk, they know that it's a milk substitute, that it's not actual milk. And so there's this idea of maris ayin, which could be applicable if we're dealing with a situation of we're dealing with a situation where it's a biblical prohibition. So, I referenced before symposium that appeared in the Jewish press 3 years ago. The primary concern, this is Rabbi Yitzhak Shochet, an educator in England. The primary concern with eating imitation bacon is maris ayin. People might think, and remember, maris ayin, if it's a biblical prohibition, that you have to be concerned that people may think you're eating the wrong thing. If it's a biblical prohibition, then you can't even do it if nobody's around. Afilu b'chadrei chadarim. But if imitation bacon is readily recognized kosher delicacy, I need not deny myself the pleasure on account of the possibility of someone wrongly accusing me. All right, so again, this enters into the whole conversation. If someone sees an identifiably observant Jew doing the wrong thing, would they think that it's not the wrong thing because the likelihood is there's another good possibility? So, in this case, maybe if you have someone who's wearing a yarmulke and is eating in a kosher restaurant and it's eating something that looks like bacon, maybe it's not real bacon. Maybe that's enough of a possible alternative to obviate the maris ayin. They sometimes talk about, the whole idea if someone has to run into a non-kosher restaurant to use the restroom or get something to drink or something like that, maybe you shouldn't wear your yarmulke because they don't know that you're Jewish. And some people would respond, no, you absolutely should wear the yarmulke because if you wear a yarmulke and you go into a non-kosher restaurant, they know you're not eating they'll be sure you're not eating non-kosher. You're there for another reason. So that's what Rabbi Shochet is introducing here as well. There is a maris ayin issue, but maris ayin always has to be balanced with whether or not there's his language is readily recognized kosher alternative, or whether there's another possible situation here. However, there's another principle to consider. Kadoshim to you, kadesh atzmach mutar lach. Should sanctify yourself with what is prohibited. Not everything acceptable is necessarily appropriate. There's an ancient Hasidic adage. What you must not do, don't do, and what you're allowed to do, you don't need to do. It might be halachically acceptable to eat kosher bacon, but as my father was wont to say, it's paslish. It's not appropriate. So, here, the halachic issue of maris ayin is something that could exist, and it could exist even to consume these products privately. At the same time, if there's an alternative, then there's something that can, there's another possibility it could be okay. But then he raises the possibility of whether this is a good idea. Maybe there's other things that we should be spending our money on and in eating those other types of food. It's not befitting. And what he's referring to is source number 7, where the Ramban Nachmanides says about Kedoshim Tihiyu, that I've seen it mentioned that without any qualification, be self-restraining. Kadesh atzmacha b'mutar lach. You want to do so. Just because you're allowed to doesn't mean you should go and enjoy everything that's permissible. Everything needs to be done in moderation. Everything needs to be done in good taste. Everything needs to go with the appropriate mindset. And so this is the source on the other side of what we saw before. All right, we saw source number 3. If you can have it, you'll be judged for not having it if it's permissible. And here we're saying it's permissible, maybe you should still refrain. And the difference between those two sources is the different approaches that can be taken to these types of products. Questions, comments, thoughts? Anyone making fake bacon for breakfast? Okay. So, that idea of be self-restraining, is it appropriate, is invoked by Rabbi Yosef Blau. Yosef Blau is the Mashgiach, spiritual advisor at Yeshiva University. Observing kosher restrictions serves to separate observant Jews from outside society and train them in religious discipline. Both goals remain even with kosher bacon. Nevertheless, the excited anticipation of being permitted to eat food that had been prohibited is unseemly. It gives the impression that one has lost out through keeping the laws of kashrut, of an important pleasure of life. We already have the phenomenon of Orthodox Jews flocking to resorts for Passover where they are served every possible imitation chametz product. All right, so he's introducing another possibility of things, not from a halachic perspective. If it's chametz, it's chametz. If it's kosher for Pesach, it's kosher for Pesach. But he's pushing down a little bit more on this issue raised by the Ramban and alluded to by Rabbi Shochet. Like, it's one thing to want to enjoy that which is permitted, and it's one thing to, have a desire to eat what's not allowed, and if there's a kosher alternative to enjoy it. But maybe we've taken it a little bit too far. Look, these kosher, these Pesach programs are absolutely kosher for Passover, and whether they're serving kosher for Pesach pizza or kosher for Pesach bread, these are all items that are being done with, within the confines of halacha. And so, Rabbi Blau is going from this idea of the Ramban. He would rather err to that side of the equation rather than the Talmud Yerushalmi and enjoy anything he possibly can. And that's where he wants to draw the line. Questions, comments? So there's an interesting statement in the Talmud in Chulin that raises this issue. It's actually a teaching of Yalta. Source number one, Yalta was the wife of Rav Nachman. So Yalta said to her husband, Rav Nachman, as a rule, for any item that the merciful one prohibited to us, he permitted to us a similar item. He prohibits us the consumption of blood, yet he permitted to us the consumption of liver, which is filled with blood and retains the taste of blood. The Torah prohibits the consumption of the forbidden fat of a domesticated animal, a kosher domesticated animal, but permitted the fat of an undomesticated animal, which has the same flavor. It prohibited to eat pork, is prohibited to eat pork, but one may eat the brain of a shibuta fish, which has a similar taste. One may not eat giruta, a non-kosher fish, but can eat the tongue of a fish which has a similar taste. So here, Yalta, probably, I'm guessing she did most of the cooking in that household, is letting Rav Nachman know that there are kosher alternatives to non-kosher food products, and that was part of the intent. You're not missing out on these things because there's a kosher alternative, including, in particular, pork. Right? You can have the shibuta fish. Now, I don't think we've discovered the shibuta fish, but the idea here is that when it comes to non-kosher food items, a kosher alternative seems to be a very real option and part of the divine plan. Whatever is prohibited has a permitted option. And I think this definitely informs a lot of the consumption of some of the fake products, throughout, especially, before we get to this conversation on pork today. You talk about mock crab, and you talk about bacos, you talk about products which have been around for a long time. I think that this statement of Yalta very much, informs that conversation. Miriam, question.
My question is it just a question of what the product is called? Because margarine is a substitute for butter. It was never called fake butter.
Right.
And I think it's been used by Jews since it's been invented.
Correct.
So if they called it
Our dairy.
Right.
Well, so
Right,
I think that the name of the product clearly seems to be problematic now, because this whole idea of having kosher pork seems to be problematic. Now, kosher bacon didn't seem to be as problematic, but I don't know in terms of the products that are out there. I think there's definitely some validity that in recent years the marketing of some of these products has led to more bolder declarations that require having to deal with some of these incongruities. So Bacos has the word bacon in it, but it's not bacon. They have these things, shripples, which are soy strips. That's
No,
where
but what
things
about,
used to-
it's not shrimp, Rabbi. It's not shrimp. It's
well,
Alaskan pollock.
It's not
One of
shrimp.
Armin's favorite foods.
Exactly. It tells you that it's not. Here we're
Why can't they
introducing-
say it's not pork?
Well, they don't want to, but that's what I'm getting to. I think they don't want to. I think that the marketing now, the impossible pork, is they want the pork in the product. They found a new way to, I guess, have their pork and not have their pork and eat it too by putting it in the product. And what the marketing is looking for, kind of a way of, a little bit of a shock value, right? It's impossible pork, but it's kosher. So you have kosher and pork right on the same. You have kosher and pork. You have kosher and pork in the same label. I think that's causing the problem. If it was called "it's not pork," I think there'd probably be less of an objection. And I think that that might be the change between 2015 and when you have all these bacon products and the OU not getting in the way, and here where it's more problematic. And the case that I mentioned earlier, this some of the needing to be more clear on the menu of not having bacon. I think the issue, there was in Israel, the restaurant Crave in the Machne Yehuda Shuk had to change the way they described the lamb bacon on their menu.
Rabbi Weinstein,
Yes.
one wonders if there's pressure from the meat industry, as there always had been, for certifying things politically in one neighborhood, so it's possible OU is sort of bound by this not to allow this. It will cause people not to purchase their own goods.
Right. Look, as we have said before, it's not the first kosher subject that we've talked about. That kosher is the unholy trinity of money, politics, and religion.
Oh.
So there's always going to be, and even Rabbi Genack admits that in the article by saying it's not a halachic conversation per se. It's more about how things are going to be perceived by the kosher consumer. If the OU is giving supervision to impossible pork, that may hurt the brand and its acceptability on other levels, which will become more problematic. But I think that this source here, source number 9, this Yalta, is what has informed a lot of the products that have been used for longer periods of time, like the margarine, like the fish substitutes for shrimp and the like. And Rabbi Angel references this in his discussion of the subject. Source number 10. Some years ago, my wife and I were eating at a kosher vegetarian Chinese restaurant. A Hasidic couple sat at the table next to ours. When the waiter asked for their orders, the Hasidic man said in a loud voice, "I'd like the pork ribs." His wife chimed in, "And I'd like the eel." It still struck me as odd to see a Hasidic couple order pork and eel, and to order with an obvious sense of glee. On the other hand, why shouldn't they have derived satisfaction from eating an otherwise forbidden product, as if to say, along with Yalta, we're not deprived of the various cuisines and tastes available to the non-kosher world. Although such foods are kosher, some will have a visceral negative reaction to being served fake pork or fake crab. I think each individual should make a personal decision what is and is not comfortable to consume. Right, and so it's kind of this idea that we're getting maybe a little too enthusiastic about the options out there in calling them, even though it's mock, but referencing them, saying, yeah, we're eating bacon, we're eating the pork ribs and the like. Again, everyone has to find their comfort zone, but again, it's not halachic. It's trying to find the right balance between enjoying what we can and recognizing that we don't want to go too far. And look, it could be, along the lines, it's not a lifnei iver situation per se. I've even mentioned this before, but maybe there is this, kind of, if you talk in the language of eating the product, let's have the pork, even though it's not pork. There could be a little bit of backsliding and concern for maintaining the laws of kosher. I do know that if I am not mistaken, that if you ever, if you go into some of these kosher Dunkin' Donuts that sell sandwiches, the Dunkin' Donuts menu is kind of set, even though the kosher franchises don't sell the bacon, egg, and cheese on a croissant. But I think the kosher ones in particular have been instructed by their kosher supervision that if someone orders a bacon, egg, and cheese on a croissant, they have to interject it's fake bacon or it's a vegetarian bacon, egg, and cheese. I know that that's, I've heard that issue in different kosher Dunkin' Donuts and places that they don't want it to be known as bacon, egg, and cheese, even though that's the traditional across the board Dunkin' menu item. They don't want it to be ordered that way in kosher places. Again, a sensitivity to this idea. So the last source we're going to look at is looking at this from a very more of a spiritual, holistic way, and it makes sense to take a Hasidic approach. Today is the 19th day of Kislev, Yutes Kislev, noted on the Hasidic calendar as a momentous day. For all Hasidim, it was the yurtzeit of the Maggid of Mezrich. Maggid of Mezrich was the primary student of the Baal Shem Tov and helped spread the Baal Shem Tov's teachings into the various Hasidic groups. And in the Chabad world, Yutes Kislev is known as the day that the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, was released from prison, and that changed his whole approach to teaching Hasidic thought. And it's viewed as kind of their new year for Hasidic thought in the Chabad world. Interesting, since I was intrigued by this and looked it up earlier today, other significant events. There was a 12th century scholar, the Rimi Korbail, who wrote that the 19th of Kislev is a special day. He doesn't explain why. It just is known as a special day. And if you're looking for other events, great events in Jewish history on the 19th of Kislev, it was the day that Saddam Hussein was captured in 2003. It was the day the Iraq War ended in 2011. And it was the day that 19 Kislev 2017, although is when when President Trump formally announced that Jerusalem would be the site of the embassy. So just some other historical tidbits of the 19th of Kislev. But for us, we're going to look at the teachings of Rav Tzadok HaKohen, source number 11. And the observance of the laws of Kashrut encompasses all the other laws of the Torah. In the Garden of Eden, the snake was only able to entice Adam and Chava to sin by creating a desire for the forbidden food, the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Someone who is careful about only eating kosher foods and imbuing them with holiness thereby keeps all the mitzvahs of the Torah. Because the only way that the evil inclination can rule over a person is through eating and drinking. As the verse says, you shall eat and drink. Be careful lest your heart lead you astray. Right. So this idea of kosher from a spiritual perspective. This is the Gemara has a statement that non-kosher can be mitamteim es halev, can somehow be a stigma, can negatively impact the heart. And for Rav Tzadok, taking it one step further, that our souls are nourished by keeping kosher, and they can be negatively impacted by eating not kosher. And maybe it's not just the non-kosher, it's not just kosher and non-kosher from a halachic perspective, from a spiritual perspective as well. And so, that brought to mind Rabbi Zev Leff's response to this question about fake mock products. Practically speaking, it would appear that one who craves these delicacies because of gastronomic considerations may eat them privately. However, public affairs such as weddings, bar mitzvahs, where the motivation to serve these foods may be to mimic non-Jewish catering techniques, I would be hesitant to permit it. Not for any halachic reason, but for this, it's a hashkafic, spiritual reason to avoid making this front and center. Thinking back to the examples that we're talking about practically, maybe this is why the Rabbanut in Jerusalem made Crave change its menu. They didn't want this to be something front and center, even if technically speaking there wasn't anything halachically wrong. And it would seem that there's a little bit more of a sensitivity these days towards these concerns. Not that there's anything halachically wrong with it, but from a spiritual level, it's permitted, but we don't have to get so excited by it. We should recognize it. We don't have to put it front and center. And because as we're seeing in some of these later sources, maybe it does weaken some of the connections that we have to traditional kosher. And that is something that is of concern when we look at the state of the Jewish world today. So I figure since we talked about turkey last year before Thanksgiving, we would talk about pork before this Thanksgiving. Not sure what else is on people's menus this weekend. But here are some of the halachic and meta halachic issues relating to this topic as presented in the headlines last week.